47 seconds. That's all it took for a smug insult to explode into a televised disaster watched by 13.1 million Americans. Stephen Lynch swatted at Jasmine Crockett's law degree like it was a fly. She didn't blink, she turned a page and dropped a folder like a guillotine. What truth was sealed inside that drained the color from a congressman's face on live national TV? The hearing room looked like it had been dipped in bleach, and politics too clean, too quiet, too fake. Chairs lined up like soldiers afraid to move, flags stiff as cardboard. The kind of place where truth didn't walk in, it got filtered through PR statements and buried under coffee-stained memos. For a moment, everything felt scripted, until Stephen Lynch leaned back, eyes-sharp voice coated in condescension, and dropped a line he thought would land like a joke. "I'm sure your law school in Texas taught you the basics." It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It landed soft like a silk glove hiding brass knuckles. A few aides chuckled under their breath. One congressman raised his eyebrows, smirking without smiling. It was the kind of insult meant to bruise without leaving a mark. Lynch didn't even look at her after saying it. He leaned back, crossed his arms, and tapped his fingers like the verdict had already been written. But Jasmine Crockett didn't move. Not an inch. She didn't glance his way, didn't roll her eyes. Her face was still too still, like the air before a storm. Then came the sound. Not a word, not a sigh, just the slow shh of one page turning in the folder in front of her. It wasn't just paper. It sounded like something unzipping a zipper on a body bag or a fuse being lit. One page, that's all. But somehow it echoed louder than any rebuttal. The kind of silence that didn't ask for attention, it demanded it. And in that split second, the smirk started to falter. Because when a woman doesn't defend herself, maybe it's not because she's weak. Maybe it's because she's loading. What the hell was in that folder? The page had barely settled when the air shifted. Not with sound, but with stillness, so sharp it felt like a blade sliding under the skin of the room. A junior clerk near the back froze, mid-sentence, pen hovering over paper. Across the aisle, a reporter fumbled her phone and dropped her stylus with a soft clatter that suddenly felt deafening. People didn't breathe, they watched. The camera operator, a 15-year C-SPAN veteran, didn't need direction. He tightened the frame on Jasmine's face instinct, screaming, this wasn't a procedural lull. This was the storm's inhale. She hadn't said a single word, but something in her posture, unshaken calm, precise, crackled like static before lightning hits. Behind her, aides shifted in their seats like their spines remembered fear. In a control room 3 blocks away, a CNN producer whispered, "Hold on her." The switchboard lit up. On social media, the clip was already out. 16 seconds. Cropped, captioned, circulating. The screen froze on Jasmine's expression, unreadable, unbothered, unbowed. One caption went viral in under 5 minutes. Watch her flip the room without speaking a word. Comments flooded in. That silence just screamed louder than any mic. She's got something, and he knows it. Yo, did you see Lynch swallow after she turned that page? People weren't just watching, they were hunting for meaning. Every twitch, every blink, every breath. Because when someone doesn't flinch after being insulted on live national television, it's not confidence, it's calculation. And now millions were wondering the same thing the people in that room were starting to fear. What kind of woman turns a page like that and makes a man with 20 years of power look suddenly temporary? The folder looked ordinary, beige, unmarked, the kind of thing interns carry without thinking. But it wasn't ordinary. It was a weapon wrapped in cardboard. For 11 months, Jasmine Crockett had filled it in silence. Late nights, sealed emails, back-channel interviews with whistleblowers, too scared to speak out loud. Every page was a fuse, and Stephen Lynch had just handed her the match. This wasn't a reaction. It was a setup. He'd mocked her law degree thinking he was striking, first never realizing the ground beneath him had already been sawed in half. Jasmine hadn't come to defend herself. She came to expose something. And now, with one quiet page flipped, the countdown had begun. Inside that folder, housing reports buried under jargon, expenditure memos, signed with Lynch's initials and a payment trail leading to a nonprofit that didn't exist on any federal registry, but did happen to share an address with his brother's consulting firm. One of the pages had an email chain plain as day, where a Lynch staffer wrote, "Not politically urgent." Pushed to Q3, another listed a $27,000 contractor payout under miscellaneous with no vendor, no audit, no paper trail, except the one Jasmine built by hand. She had spent nights studying HUD regulations with a flashlight and a cracked laptop, cross-referencing file codes, tracing invoices, rereading ethics committee bylaws until her eyes burned. Every page had been prepared for this moment, not to go viral, not to make headlines, but to bring a man like Lynch to the edge without ever raising her voice. And the sickest part he still didn't know. He was still smiling, still smug, still thinking the insult had landed. Still blind to the fact that Jasmine Crockett wasn't just turning a page, she was turning the chamber into a courtroom. 1 week earlier, in a narrow hallway behind the Capitol's cloakroom, a conversation slipped through the cracks, too low for a microphone, too sharp to be casual. Lynch's chief of staff leaned into a junior aide and said it like a punchline. "Just mention Texas, that'll set her off. No hesitation, no shame." Like they'd done it before and watched it work. It wasn't strategy, it was a stunt. But more than that, it was a trap dressed in a suit and polished like a talking point. They weren't aiming to debate Jasmine Crockett. They were aiming to unnerve her, to poke at something deeper than policy. Her accent, her state, her story. That line about her Texas law degree. It was a preloaded trigger coated in regional bias designed to draw fire. The kind of move men in power use when the facts aren't on their side, but the cameras are. To them, Jasmine was still the outsider. The Southern woman who spoke too plainly, fought too hard, rose too fast. If they could rattle her, get her loud, get her mad, they could clip the footage, twist the narrative, and paint her as unstable. They didn't want to outsmart her. They wanted to control the moment, humiliate her, make her a meme. But what they didn't know, what Lynch never bothered to ask, was that Jasmine had heard that tone before. In courtrooms, in law school, in eviction offices where clients were told they didn't look like they belonged. And every time someone said Texas like it was an insult, she didn't snap. She sharpened. She didn't sharpen in the halls of Congress. She sharpened under flickering fluorescence in the back of a laundromat in South Dallas, where the machines never stopped humming and the chairs leaned just enough to feel broken. It was past midnight. Her uniform still smelled like bleach. A dryer clanged like thunder in the background as Jasmine sat hunched over a stack of statutes, her cracked fingers gripping a red pen like it was a scalpel. Every line she highlighted was a lifeline, one she knew she'd need when the cameras finally found her. Her folder hadn't started in an office. It started on receipts, on menus, on eviction notices she flipped over and scribbled legal codes onto. She didn't have a printer that worked half the time, so she printed case law in thirds, taping the pieces together like a puzzle. There were no aides, no interns, no advisors, just her, a broken stapler, and the sound of belief rattling in her chest like a second heartbeat. She studied while her feet ached from double shifts. She memorized while waiting for buses that came late. She built her fire quietly, without applause, without witnesses, because she knew this day would come. She knew someone would try to reduce her to where she came from. She knew the word Texas would one day be weaponized and thrown at her like it was supposed to sting. But she didn't flinch at the word. She'd buried too much truth inside that folder to be shaken by syllables. And when Stephen Lynch opened his mouth, she didn't hear an insult, she heard a door unlock. Because this wasn't improvisation. This was the cue she'd been preparing for in silence since the day the world told her she didn't belong. The first page wasn't dramatic. It didn't scream. It didn't flash red. It was quiet, deadly quiet. A housing report buried in subcommittee filings from 11 months ago. Midway down the page in a table, most staffers would have skipped, sat a single line, $842, Washington, transitional housing support, pending review. No signature, no motion, no follow-up. Just money had vanished into paper. Most people would have missed it. In fact, they had. Dozens of eyes had scanned that file. Not one had questioned why nearly $1 million taxpayer dollars had been tagged pending for nearly a year without explanation. It was a clerical ghost meant to be forgotten. But Jasmine had traced the footnote. It referenced a request for procedural review that by law should have been filed within 30 days. It never was, and that's where it started. Behind that $842,000 were layers of rot, a non-existent contractor, a fake address, a reclassification memo signed by Lynch's senior aide, and a vendor ID number that didn't match any licensed business in the state of Massachusetts. Jasmine had tracked every breadcrumb. Every time she opened a file, it led somewhere dirtier. By the time she was done, her folder had grown from one odd page to something resembling a slow-motion detonation. Now she'd opened it. Page 1. That was all. But the effect was instant. Lynch stopped tapping his fingers. A Republican 2 chairs down leaned away slightly, like trying not to be hit by shrapnel. No one said a word, but everyone could feel it. If that was the first page, how many more bombs was she sitting on? At 1:03 a.m., the Capitol was sleeping, but Illa Carter wasn't. Jasmine's lead aide had stayed late combing through subcommittee folders one last time when her phone buzzed. No ID, no voicemail. Just a raspy voice on the other end that said 6 words before the line went dead. Page 89. Housing report. Before they erase it. The words didn't sound like a warning. They sounded like a countdown. Illa didn't hesitate. Within minutes, she was back inside their office, bypassing sleep and protocol. She and Jasmine didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Jasmine booted up the secure archive terminal, while Illa pulled a black binder off the top shelf, one labeled 2017-2020 Internal Reclassifications. No one had touched it in years, that was the point. Page 89 wasn't obvious. It wasn't bolded, flagged, or indexed. But halfway down the page, wedged between jargon and funding codes, they found it. A $320,000 discretionary grant allocated to a nonprofit for urban renewal consulting. No audit trail, no vendor verification, no attached contract, just a mailing address in Quincy, Massachusetts. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. She knew that zip code. She opened a separate browser, typed in the address, and there it was. A modest 2-story colonial, registered under the name Thomas Lynch. Stephen's brother. No office, no website, no staff. Just a mailbox with money pouring into it. Jasmine leaned back, exhaled slow, and looked at the clock. 1:31 a.m. Whoever made that call wasn't trying to help. They were trying to stop her from getting there too late. But they were already too late. The nonprofit didn't exist, at least not in any legal sense. No tax ID, no staff roster, no physical office. Just a name slapped onto a funding line, a mailbox, and a memory because Jasmine remembered it. One of Lynch's bundlers had used that exact name during his 2018 re-election campaign, listed as a strategic advisor in FEC filings. On paper, it looked like outreach. In reality, it was laundering with taxpayer money as the detergent. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't call for backup. She just started printing page after page like loading bullets into a magazine. Memo approvals with half-signed initials, contractor receipts marked miscellaneous, emails between Lynch's staffers using phrases like skip review, fast track without committee, and no visibility needed. There were signatures, timestamps, internal routing codes only subcommittee veterans would even notice. Every page wasn't just a detail, it was a domino. By the time the printer tray was full, Jasmine had a stack that didn't look dangerous until you read it. It wasn't a conspiracy theory. It wasn't hearsay. It was procedural betrayal written in courier font and buried in quarterly updates no one bothered to read. Lynch had counted on that. He had counted on apathy, bureaucracy, silence. But what he hadn't counted on was her. She clipped the files, slid them into the folder, and wrote one word in the corner of the cover, confirmed. Then she closed it like a case file, like a coffin. And across town, as Lynch slept soundly in a townhouse paid for by campaign donors, in silence he had no idea. His entire career had just been printed page by damning page. Jasmine had everything she needed to end him. Documents, signatures, routing logs, a money trail too crooked to explain away. Any other politician would have leaked it to the press by sunrise. One call to Politico, one encrypted email to a trusted journalist, and Stephen Lynch's name would have been plastered across every Chiron in America. But Jasmine didn't move. She didn't click send. Because she didn't just want exposure, she wanted precision. This wasn't a scandal to toss into the digital fire. This was a scalpel. And she wanted Lynch to hand her the stage himself, to smile one more time, to speak with that same arrogance, to think he was still in control. She wanted his downfall to be televised, frame by frame, word by word, A live broadcast of power, realizing too late that it's been walking barefoot into a minefield. So she waited through meetings, headlines, and silence. She kept the folder sealed, let the buzz cool just enough for him to feel safe again. Let him believe she'd let it go, that she'd been rattled, embarrassed, put in her place. It was bait. And Lynch, predictable as ever, was already circling the next camera. Jasmine watched the news schedule. She knew he was booked for a televised town hall in 3 days. Knew he wouldn't be able to resist bringing her up again, mocking her, minimizing her. And that's when she'd strike. Not through a leak, not through Twitter, but on live television, where the last word would belong to her folder, not his mouth. What if the next time he speaks is the last time he gets to? The fuse Jasmine lit didn't detonate in the chamber. It exploded online. At 7:14 a.m., a shaky, close-angled video surfaced on a fringe political forum, then spread like wildfire to Reddit X in every group chat in Washington. It wasn't long, just 21 seconds. Grainy, no timestamp, but the audio was clear as a bullet through glass. Stephen Lynch, back room, no filter. If she won't shut up, we'll make her irrelevant. The silence that followed wasn't technical, it was damning. No laughter, no pushback, just the rustle of suits and the soft squeak of someone shifting in their leather chair. He wasn't caught in a moment of anger. He was strategizing, calm, cold, like erasing a woman was just part of a daily agenda. It hit social media like a sledgehammer. Within 15 minutes, the clip was trending under She Won't Be Silenced. Church leaders, civil rights attorneys, even retired judges reposted it with captions like, "We've heard this before. We're not hearing it again." And while Lynch's office scrambled for damage control, calling it taken out of context, no one was buying it. The context was the problem. But Jasmine didn't issue a statement, didn't take a podium. She stayed quiet just like they wanted, only now her silence was radioactive. Because it wasn't just a leak, it was a warning. And the question rolling across every news chyron by noon wasn't, is the clip real? It was something far more dangerous. If this is what he says behind closed doors, what else is he hiding? The backlash wasn't loud, it was volcanic. Within an hour, the clip had crossed from politics into culture. Twitter became a battlefield. First came the veterans, Southern Black Proud, posting photos in uniform with captions like, "We fought for that voice. You won't silence it now." Then came the educators, the pastors, the single mothers who'd heard that tone before. Condescending, casual, dangerous. She Won't Be Silenced started trending in 32 states. Then Southern Strong. Then We Heard You, Stephen. People weren't just angry, they were insulted. Because Lynch hadn't just attacked Jasmine. He had attacked a whole region, a whole rhythm of speech, a whole generation that had to fight twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. The accent they told their children to tone down was now echoing louder than ever across cable news and Capitol corridors. In Mississippi, church bells rang at noon. In Alabama, black farmers staged a moment of silence in the middle of a cotton field. In Georgia, a group of retired nurses gathered on a courthouse lawn, holding signs that read, "Texas teaches more than basics." The reaction wasn't partisan, it was personal, because everyone knew a Jasmine, and too many had been her. Meanwhile, Jasmine remained silent. She didn't tweet, didn't blink, and that silence. It only made the movement louder. The more she held back, the more the nation surged forward like a rising tide that no microphone could stop. By nightfall, journalists weren't chasing Lynch anymore. They were chasing each other, trying to answer the one question flooding every newsroom inbox. If this is how America responds to a voice nearly erased, what happens when that voice finally speaks? They cornered her in the hallway, reporters swarming like flies to heat. Microphones stretched inches from her lips. "Congresswoman Crockett, any comment on the Lynch recording? Do you believe it was a threat? Is this going to impact your work on the committee?" Cameras were rolling. Headlines were waiting. The nation wanted a soundbite. But Jasmine didn't deliver one. She stopped, looked straight into the lens, calm, still eyes like polished steel, and said 6 words that hit harder than any outburst. "Let the documents speak first." That was it. No anger, no counterpunch. Just a promise. And that silence didn't cool the fire, it poured gasoline on it. The internet froze for a second, then detonated. She's holding something one tweet read, and it's not her temper. She's not dodging, she's aiming. This isn't defense, this is orchestration. Suddenly, silence became strategy. Journalists stopped writing speculation pieces. They started counting the days. Activists began printing her quote onto posters like scripture. Even late-night hosts dropped their punchlines and said it straight. If Jasmine's still quiet, it's because she's building something nuclear. Inside Capitol Hill, staffers on both sides were whispering. Phones buzzed with texts like, "Does she have receipts? What's in that damn folder? Should we be worried?" And still Jasmine said nothing. Because she understood something they didn't. A voice doesn't have to be loud to be lethal. And the longer she stayed silent, the more everyone started wondering, how much louder could one folder be than an entire man's career? They called it a roundtable, neutral ground, civil discussion. But anyone who'd watched politics long enough knew exactly what it was, a trap in hair and makeup. CNN had invited Jasmine Crockett to appear alongside Douglas Rain, a polished retired senator and longtime Lynch confidant. Rain was media-savvy, grandfatherly, and armed with just enough charm to discredit someone without looking like he'd drawn blood. The producers framed it as balance, but it reeked of setup. They didn't know Jasmine had already seen the script and rewritten her own. She walked into the studio without a publicist, without a talking point memo, without even a coffee. But in her bag, tucked beneath a notepad in an old leather binder, was a printed memo stamped with the seal of the Housing Subcommittee and signed clearly, undeniably by Stephen Lynch. The paper looked old, but it wasn't fragile. It was explosive. They seated her across from Rain under soft lighting and the hum of countdown cues. The moderator welcomed both parties. Rain smiled like a man prepping for a gentle takedown. And Jasmine? She said nothing, just waited. Her fingers calmly tapped the folder in her lap, like a metronome, counting down to something only she could hear. When the topic turned predictably to oversight and ethics, Rain leaned in with that rehearsed empathy. "Surely, Congresswoman, you don't believe these rumors mean Mr. Lynch acted with malicious intent." He smiled like a history book. The room paused, the producers held their breath, and Jasmine Crockett slowly lifted the folder from her lap, calm as dusk unzipped it with 2 fingers and pulled out one page. One page that would turn a round table into a reckoning. The air in the studio shifted, subtle at first, like the pressure drop before a storm. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't point fingers or demand outrage. She simply laid the document flat on the table, pressed it gently so the camera could catch the header, and began to read. Her voice was steady, calm, like a surgeon calling out incisions. Line 14, allocation approved, no committee review needed, S. Lynch. The signature was crisp, unmistakable, the kind you can't scrub or spin. The moderator blinked, lips slightly parted, caught between professionalism and panic. A producer's voice crackled in the earpiece too late. Jasmine turned another page, then another. Each document was a thread, and she was unraveling the entire suit of a congressman in real time. Douglas Rain froze. His hands stiffened on the desk, eyes locked on the paper like it had teeth. Then without a word, he reached behind his ear and removed his microphone, laid it down, quietly, carefully. The silence wasn't awkward, it was apocalyptic. The control room fell into chaos. Cameras zoomed tighter. Anchor notes were tossed aside. This wasn't a segment anymore. This was a live dissection. And Jasmine didn't flinch. She placed one final page down the funding trail, leading directly to the shell organization linked to Lynch's brother. No metaphors, no accusations. Just facts lined up like dominoes with names, dates, and dollar signs. By the time the commercial break finally came, the comment section was already melting down. And across millions of screens, one question burned louder than any headline. If this is what she revealed on live TV, what the hell is still in that folder? The fallout didn't wait for the cameras to cool. 15 minutes after the segment ended, a senior advisor to Stephen Lynch placed a call from a Capitol Hill corridor and resigned. No press release, no spin, just 2 words left on voicemail: "I'm done." 1 hour later, 2 more aides went silent. Their LinkedIn profiles quietly updated. Their inboxes auto-replied with out-of-office messages they would never return from. By sundown, the media landscape was splitting open. Fox News, once dismissive, pivoted hard. New evidence could signal deeper corruption in committee leadership. They flashed across the lower third. MSNBC didn't hold back Crockett's folder crushed the machine. Twitter turned courtroom. Threads popped up decoding every line of the memo, each screenshot dissected like a crime scene. A TikTok clip of Jasmine's hand sliding the folder across the table hit 2.4 million views in 4 hours, dubbed in 4 languages. Even Gen Z wasn't blinking. And Lynch, he vanished. No public appearance. No statement. The lights outside his office stayed dark. Inside the Capitol, his name became radioactive, spoken only in whispers avoided on camera. Staffers walked faster past room 204. Colleagues canceled meetings due to schedule conflicts that didn't exist. It was a collapse in real time. But Jasmine said nothing. Again. She walked out of the CNN building the same way she had walked, in quiet, composed, folder in hand. A dozen reporters followed. She didn't stop, didn't wave, just got into the back seat of a black SUV and disappeared into the DC night. And as the headlines churned and the silence swelled, one question buried itself in every political strategist's brain like a ticking clock. What happens when the silence turns the system inside out? The counterattack didn't come with shouts or press conferences. It came in the form of a neatly typed motion quietly slid across a committee clerk's desk just before the holiday recess. Stephen Lynch moved to expel Jasmine Crockett from the Oversight Committee, citing her behavior as unpredictable, performative, and detrimental to institutional order. The language was cold, sterile, surgically chosen, but the intent brutal. It was a final swing dressed in protocol, a bureaucratic ambush. Lynch knew the news cycle was softening. People were heading home, tuning out. If he could move fast, bury her under procedure, while the country was distracted by turkeys and tinsel, maybe, just maybe, he could survive. The motion circulated among staffers in brown envelopes marked urgent in red ink. No one spoke openly, but the tension was loud. He was betting on silence, on fatigue, on the belief that Jasmine had already spent her last bullet live on air. He underestimated what silence had become. Jasmine received a copy of the motion the same night, left anonymously on her windshield, weighted by a paperclip. She didn't curse, didn't cry, just stared at it for a long moment under the streetlight glow as snow began to fall in flurries around her. Her breath was calm, her hands steady, because Lynch didn't understand yet. When a system tries to erase a voice, that voice doesn't vanish, it sharpens. The hearing room was packed, shoulder-to-shoulder air, thick with anticipation and unspoken agendas. Lynch sat poised, papers stacked in front of him like a shield, convinced the motion would glide through with the ease of routine. No fireworks, just a quiet erasure veiled in parliamentary tone. Jasmine sat at the far end, motionless, eyes forward, unreadable. It wasn't the vote that would decide her fate. It was who dared to speak before it fell. Then from the second row, a chair scraped back. Congressman Dale Rohr, a longtime ally of Lynch, stood up. Not planned, not coordinated, just stood. His voice was raw, worn like denim, but clear enough to cut through the noise. "She's more stable," he said slowly, "than any of us, pretending not to see what's been sitting in front of us for years." Silence. One beat, two, and then everything shifted. Members who had been ready to nod and rubber stamp Lynch's motion hesitated. A few exchanged glances. One put their pen down. The vote didn't just stall, it turned, quietly, deliberately. The committee flipped like a tide, reversing in real time. When the final tally was read aloud, Jasmine kept her seat. Lynch didn't flinch, but his jaw tensed. Rohr simply sat back down, didn't look at anyone. He didn't do it for Jasmine. He did it because something in her silence had rattled his own. And as reporters scrambled to update headlines, one thought echoed across the marble floors of the Capitol. If the quiet ones are rising, who falls next? She didn't gloat, didn't even blink. Jasmine Crockett rose from her seat like a blade, unsheathed, calm, precise, final. The folder was still in her hand. Its spine creased, its edges worn like a weapon that had already struck. She stepped forward without a word, heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. Then with absolute stillness, she laid the folder on the center table. One breath, one heartbeat, and then 3 knocks, firm, even, like a judge ending the hearing or a soldier saluting a war only she had survived. The room didn't move, no scribbled notes, no whispered reactions. Even the microphone seemed to freeze mid-recording. Every camera caught the same frame, a woman, not begging to be heard, but daring the nation to remember. Behind her, Lynch sat frozen, stripped of allies, of narrative, of the myth he'd wrapped himself in for 2 decades. No aid reached for him, no one stood beside him, just a paper trail and silence loud enough to bury a career. Jasmine didn't wait for applause. She didn't pause for the cameras. She turned and walked the aisle, head high, eyes forward, while the entire chamber parted like she carried the Constitution itself on her back. Outside the hearing room, reporters held their microphones breathless, unsure whether to chase or just witness. And as the door slowly shut behind her, one truth slammed harder than any headline. Some revolutions don't start with a scream, they start with 3 knocks. She didn't hold a press conference, didn't tweet. No press pool followed her down the hallway of the law library at Texas Southern University, just the echo of her heels and a folder tucked under her arm, now sealed in a red ribbon. The same folder that had flipped a vote, crushed a name, and shifted the conversation in Congress. Jasmine Crockett had carried it through fire. Now she was giving it away. She placed it quietly on a shelf lined with legal case books between 2 volumes of constitutional law. No glass casing, no plaque, just paper. Real, weighty, and unfinished. A librarian watched from behind the desk, too stunned to speak. Jasmine didn't explain. She just slid a handwritten note beneath the ribbon and stepped back. For the next one they tried to erase, it wasn't just evidence anymore. It was inheritance. A record not kept for glory, but for survival. For every young Black woman told she's too loud, too angry, too bold. For every student who might sit in that same library one day, tired, underfunded, underestimated, and realize they weren't alone. As Jasmine turned and walked out, the librarian finally whispered, "Ma'am, do you want your name on it?" Jasmine paused at the door, shook her head, and with a small, solemn smile answered, "They'll know who it belonged to when the next storm hits." Her office didn't have golden plaques, no marble busts, no framed headlines from the Washington Post, but behind her desk, stretching from floor to ceiling, stood something far heavier, a wall covered in handwritten letters. Folded notes, torn notebook paper, envelopes yellowed at the edges. Taped, pinned, pressed close like a mosaic of American survival. Some came from prison cells, others from shelters, trailer parks, detention centers. One was scribbled in crayon by a 10-year-old whose mother had watched Jasmine on TV and whispered, "That's how you fight with your mind." Another, written in shaking cursive, was from a Vietnam veteran who hadn't voted in 20 years. Until her. No spotlight had ever asked for these letters. No speech had ever promised them. But they came, and kept coming. Because when Jasmine dropped the folder, she didn't just expose corruption. She proved that silence, when used right, can be louder than any scream. She read them all, not for praise, but for fuel, for clarity, for the reminder that impact isn't measured in committee chairs or primetime headlines. It's measured in ink, in trembling hands that finally dared to write. She never called the wall a trophy, never told the press about it. But some nights when the lights were off and the building emptied out, she'd stand there alone, eyes scanning the words that Washington never counted, and behind her, the city slept still, unaware it had already changed. The screen faded in black background, no music, no edits. Just Jasmine Crockett centered in frame, eyes, steady voice, low like a storm before thunder. "Have you ever been laughed at?" she asked, "for how you speak, for where you were born, for daring to walk into rooms they swore you didn't belong in?" She didn't blink, didn't flinch, just leaned forward, the air tightening like a fuse being lit. "Good," she whispered. "That means they've noticed you're rising. And when they notice, they panic, not because you're loud, but because you're right." There were no closing credits, no logo splash, only stillness. Then her voice returned, quieter now, like something meant for only one listener, yet echoing across millions of screens. "What if the revolution doesn't shout? What if it waits, breathes, then strikes once, and with that the screen went black, but the silence it left behind. It rang louder than anything Congress had heard in years. Not everyone who speaks first wins. Sometimes it's the one who knows exactly when to stay silent and let the truth speak for itself. Jasmine didn't need to shout back. She simply turned the right page at the right moment, and the entire system began to tremble. Have you ever stayed silent not out of fear, but because you were holding a truth powerful enough to shift everything? Have you ever chosen silence not out of fear, but because you were holding a truth powerful enough to change everything? Share it with us. If one folder can shake a legacy, what else have we overlooked in silence? Like, share, and subscribe to Hill Insights, where quiet courage meets undeniable truth. Tap the bell, because the next time a page turns, it might expose more than just corruption. It might reveal who we truly are. What part of Jasmine's silence hit you the hardest? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's remember this moment not just as viewers, but as witnesses. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching. Truth isn't over. It's just waiting for someone to hear it.